Ladies and gentlemen, get your pen and paper out, write the notes. Dr. Chuck is on the air. Dr. Chuck Zorumski, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, hey, Kevin, it's great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me back. So.
Yeah, man. Last year was fantastic, man. So we're going to try you out again this year, all right?
That sounds good. Absolutely.
All right. And unless you've been living under a rock or whatever, and if you haven't seen the whales in the last 6 months, Whales Certified is just extremely grateful that Dr. Chuck Zorumski has put upon his, you got a mantle of all kinds of awards, but he's the official psychiatrist for Whales Certified.
That's great. That may be the highest honor I've ever gotten, Kevin.
Well, yeah. Well, you got another one on the, it's in the mail, about the Hall of Affinity. You seen that one that I told you? Yeah. It says, crazy as a loon, Kevin Whalen, by an unbelievable twist of fate, put Dr. Chuck Zorumski in the Whales Certified Hall of Affinity by merit and a few bucks.
That is a great honor, Kevin. Thanks. Actually, I've enjoyed talking with you on these things, and I've enjoyed the podcasts when I get a chance to listen to them. They've really been a pleasure to listen to and to learn from others who played the game and are still playing the game, for that matter.
And it's that's why I allow myself to be in your presence. I don't want to. You don't suffer fools, and if we weren't good together, we wouldn't be on this. So I'm very grateful for your time served here. It's kind of like I'm thinking I could offer you some indulgences.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right. Okay, so here it is now. Is about the concussion. And you have extended research and understanding of it, and that the concussion at the time and how it goes through decades of problems. You mentioned that you received one. Well, you're talking to a guy, I'm thinking I got at least a half dozen or more. And so how that goes by. Now, you have to realize I'm a retired stagehand, and you're a doctor of a famous doctor at Washington University. So I don't need a 1 versus 6. If I didn't have those 5, I could have been somebody.
That is great, Kevin. Yeah, and you're correct. So just for those listening that don't know, my background is I'm a medical doctor. I'm a psychiatrist by clinical training, but I haven't really treated head injury patients as a specialty. I've taken care of people who've had significant head injuries, and we can talk a little bit about some of those kind of problems. And then, as you know, I was a player and a coach for a long time, so I know something about the soccer aspects of all this. But I think one important disclaimer today is that, and I'm also a neuroscientist, and my lab studies how nerve cells work, how they learn and remember, but also how they go awry under stress and under injury and things like that. So I know a bit about some of the biology of all of this, and that may come into bear on what I'm talking about. But I think importantly, for today's purposes, this is not a discussion about what you should do clinically and things like that. So this is not clinical advice or anything. This is really a discussion about what I know about head injury and what I know about how the brain functions and what happens under stress. So that's the disclaimer I would kind of give up front, just so everybody knows.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why you're Whales Certified, Doctor. Yeah, if you if you were talking about something you didn't know or giving out unsolicited advice, you would be I give you the whistle, put you in timeout.
Absolutely. So maybe to talk about concussion right off the bat, I can tell you what happened to me.
Okay.
In that, so I've had one concussion that put me in the emergency room, and that was in a soccer game. It was actually a big soccer game. It was the national NCAA final in 1972, SLU versus UCLA in the Orange Bowl.
Oh
in
my
Miami.
God!
Yeah. And so we had gone up 2-0 on UCLA, and we're about maybe a quarter of the way to a third of the way through the second half, and UCLA got a ball down at the baseline with a player who we had no defenders back, and he had beaten the defense, and he was coming in along the baseline. You know that position, Kevin, how dangerous that is.
Yes.
So he's cutting across the baseline. I come up to slide him and just make him have to make a play. Well, he does make a really good play, and they end up scoring a goal off of it. For reasons I don't fully understand today, this ended up in a brawl right in the penalty area, right in front of my goal. Matter of fact, it was more than a brawl. This ended up as a riot. Fans came out of the stands. The cops were there with riot dogs and other stuff like that, trying to clean up stuff. Well, in the middle of the fight, I'm a Northside kid, but I am not a fighter, man. I mean, I grew up around some really tough guys, but I'm not one of them. So my role is always to separate players and to just not let bad things happen. Well, out of nowhere, a UCLA player takes a run at me on the blind side and headbutts me in the side of the head.
Oh.
Yeah, and so that's the concussion. So it's a traumatic but relatively milder, and this one wasn't necessarily so mild, but it was a significant injury. So from that moment of getting hit on, there's a gap of my memory of about maybe 10, 15 seconds or so. Matter of fact, it was even longer than that in the early days after the concussion. It took me about a year or two to actually recall exactly what happened leading up to the concussion. Well, next thing I know, after I get hit in the head, I'm wandering out in the center circle in midfield.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and the trainer on our team, who's a guy named Billy Strecker, comes up and he sees me kind of just walking. He says, "Hey, Chuck," says, "How you doing?" Now I remember in retrospect, I said, "Billy, I'm great. I just don't know where I am."
Oh, wow.
Billy grabs me and goes, "Chuck's night's over." So he just grabs me and yanks me back to the sideline where I sat through the remainder of the game, which we won 4-2. Before three of us ended up going to the emergency room that night after the fight and some of the dirty play that kind of ensued afterwards and whatnot. But the point of this is that, so I had a traumatic hit to my head, and it dazed the devil out of me. I never lost consciousness, but it dazed the devil out of me, and I had a gap in being able to form new memories. That's something that medicine you call anterograde amnesia, which means going forward I couldn't form new memories for a while. Eventually the stuff that happened, which is retrograde memory, much of it came back to me, but it took sometimes a year plus for some of that stuff to actually come back where I can remember it vividly. But you get these memory problems, the dazed look, a bit of a headache kind of afterwards. I never had any of the nausea or vomiting and never had any weakness of muscles or other things like that. But all of those things can happen in an acute concussion. So what I've just described to you is my version of an acute concussion because I lived it and that's the way it was and whatnot. So that sets the tone, I think, for further discussions. And, you and I have talked before, Kevin, soccer is a contact sport. We usually talk about soccer on here, but this conversation gets broader than soccer. But soccer is a contact sport. If you play a contact sport, you are going to get hurt at some point. I guarantee it if you play long enough. And head injuries occur maybe in about 10 to 20% or better of players that play the game of soccer. But soccer isn't the worst offender for getting concussions. The worst is tackle football, particularly among high school kids and things like that. But we can come back and talk about the different sports. But I hope that helps. That's what a concussion is, and it's a state of acute brain injury. And remember, for those who don't know, the brain is really a soft tissue thing that sits in a hard shell, which is our skull. And when you get hit, when you get a traumatic pounding on the side of your head, or somebody hits you, you get an injury from the site of action of the person striking you with their head or otherwise, but it also, your brain then shifts across and hits the solid wall on the other side, the skull. And so there's injuries that can occur on both sides of the brain. And not to belabor this, the brainstem, which is what feeds you and keeps your drive for breathing, your heart rate, and other things like that kind of going, there's a shearing force on the brainstem, and that's why people lose consciousness sometimes with them. And it's a state of a kind of an acute confusional state that can occur as a function of a concussion. So anyway, that may be more information than people wanted to know, but I wanted to make sure people know what I'm talking about when they're talking about concussion.
Wow. Yes. I mean, you brought the shovel today, Doctor. We're going to get involved in this. And you dropped, I'm 68 years old. I never heard that story before. Of all the guys talking about soccer, nobody's ever mentioned the riot at UCLA.
Yeah. Well, the other part to the riot at UCLA, and by the way, Kevin, if that event happened in the modern world, it would be an international story. But UCLA was almost all international players, and St. Louis U was all white Catholic kids for the most part. There may be one or two exceptions to that. And this would have been an international story with racial overtones and other kinds of things. In 1972, it got virtually no attention. There was a brief line about it in Sports Illustrated, but otherwise it got virtually no attention. I'm not sure. I don't think anybody actually got kicked out of the game. Some fans got arrested who came on the field, but it was a major event. And unfortunately, as I got beyond the head injury, I could remember a number of things that happened, but there's a gap of about 10 to 15 seconds where I don't know what actually happened to me and how I got to the center stripe of the midfield.
Did Mark Demling walk out okay?
Mark has a way of being tougher than everybody and walking out, and I would say Mark and two other guys out of the north side proceeded to put UCLA in their place in the middle of that. And not that the south side guys weren't good in this, but there were two north side guys who happened to be forwards and eventually National Players of the Year. Basically took care of UCLA after that. So it was a major event, though. So,
are you suggesting that somebody poked a bear, Mike Siri?
That would be one of them. And another one was another kid out of Sacred Heart grade school who grew up on the north side and who was Player of the Year in '73, which was Danny Counts.
Oh.
So those guys were tough. And so was Mark Demling. And St. SLU were, working class kids for the most part. Tough working class kids. SLU was not a dirty team by any stretch of the imagination, but they were tough, and I had a mental toughness, but man, I was not going to mess around with guys like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're wise. Okay, so that takes you there. Thank you for the history lesson, and so where did we leave off so you could carry on?
Yeah, so a bit about kind of what happens with them, and maybe a bit about the concerns over being a soccer player, and that you're going to get head injuries, and heading the ball can be a bad thing. This is something I've actually been asked to comment on and participate in from a medical standpoint. So maybe just a few words about that. And this surprised me. I looked some of this stuff up knowing that you and I are going to talk about this. It turns out that boys soccer is not even in the top 5 among concussions of high school age kids. It's actually 9th on the list according to the Center for Disease Control, the CDC. It turns out boys football is the biggest offender, but the second one though pulls us back to soccer. It's girls soccer.
Wow.
It's the number 2 on the list for concussive brain injuries, and nobody's really sure about why that is exactly the case. The boys' game is usually much more physical than the girls' game, but it's the body contact, the running into each other, banging heads a little bit and things, and then girls, maybe more than boys, are better at reporting symptoms. They'll tell you that something's wrong.
Oh.
Boys, I mean, if Billy Strecker hadn't come out and pulled me out of the game, I would have probably just gone back and tried to play goal.
Yeah.
It's like nothing happened. But girls tend to tell people that they've got headaches, that they've got blurred vision and other things. Boys, in fact, maybe it's because boys are a little on the dumb side. We don't even recognize it, frankly, many of us. But anyway, I thought that would be interesting to people listening. So girls playing soccer is something to keep a real eye on, in terms of head injuries, and boys too. And maybe the boys underreport the injuries that they have, and that's a significant thing, because these are serious events. Like I said, I ended up in the emergency room the evening of my head injury, and that's not to be trivialized. And again, you've talked about where this kind of goes, in terms of more chronic kinds of things, and we can talk about whatever aspects of that you want to do. Is it okay if I make a comment about heading? That's the kind of thing, because heading is a part of the game. It's. As a matter of fact, I hope heading never goes away. But now we're being much smarter. So kids below a certain age, 10, 11, or whatever it is these days, are not allowed to head in their games. And I think that's a really good thing to try to protect the young nervous system from the repetitive head impacts, is the way they're not head injuries from heading, but they're referred to as repetitive head impacts, where you're heading the ball. So and not to turn this into a soliloquy, so you come back and ask me any questions you want, Kevin. But there's a very important study that's come out of New York City of amateur soccer players in New York City, between the adults between the ages of 18 and about 50 to 55, who play at least 6 months a year and have been playing for 5 or more years. And what they've done through some of the medical schools in New York is monitor those folks for head impacts during their season, during a 1 year period of time. And it turns out the so-called median for how many times a player has a head impact, meaning heading the ball in that, is roughly about 650 to 670 times per year. For the average, a median statistical value means half of them are above that and half of them are below that. So that's a fair number of contacts with the head that occurs. And then it ranges from folks who've had 0 head impacts in a given year to some who've had over 20,000. And there's where the risk starts to go up, because one of the things they did in the New York study is to do magnetic resonance imaging, scanning, brain scans on these individuals. And there are injuries to parts of the nervous system, a deep part of the nervous system under at the bottom of the cortex, not at the very top of your head, but kind of under it, kind of more where the eyes are, so-called orbital frontal region of the brain. And that's an area that does appear to suffer some injuries from the more multiple repetitive head impacts you have, the higher the chances you're going to have some abnormalities kind of in that region. And this gets into what I tried to say earlier about the head injury. Heading the ball, you're not heading the ball with your eyes. You're heading the ball more up on your forehead and the upper part of the forehead. But nonetheless, it's the base of the brain where the skull kind of comes in that's taking the brunt of the hit in some of that. So it's just something, the idea about heading is just to be careful with it with individuals and make sure they're okay, and then limit the number of times, like in practice or other things like that they ever have to head the ball, because done well, it can be done very well, and most people suffer no sequelae to it, meaning after effects of it. But some individuals do, and I think that's important to recognize, and important for us to say. To deny it, I think, is a real mistake for us, because head injuries are a big problem in our society. So anyway, I'll stop babbling, but I wanted to make some of those points just so people know kind of what we're dealing with.
Well, I'm gonna beg you. Keep on talking. Keep on. Yeah. I mean, my gosh, there it is, and that's why the beautiful game. You say, hey man, leave the ball on the turf. Play it low, bro. It really is a safety factor for your head. There's no need to. Yeah.
It really is, and then you get to forms of soccer where playing it in the air is the biggest thing that's done. I mean, English soccer is. Some of the beauty of the English soccer game is how well it's played in the air, and
yeah.
But it does carry things that we need to be cognizant of, and players need to be evaluated on a regular basis and just kept in check. We need to pay close attention from the trainers and the coaches and other things like that about what some of the risks are. I know some people will come back and challenge what I'm saying, but I'm telling you, I'm speaking as a neuroscientist and a doc, and I'm speaking that we need to just be cognizant that these things are not strictly benign, and they can result in longer term kinds of problems, as you've said earlier in the broadcast. Yeah.
There's been previous guests and people that I meet. They talk about, say like myself, I'm 68, and sometimes you might find me in a dark room of some, and you turn the light on, and I go, "Ow!" And what's going on with you? And I said, I'm comfortable in the dark, And the story goes, is people who have had this, it's not that they have concerns. They're not worry wards. They should go, what type of doctor, their primary care, to be able to go to somebody to talk and to get tests about brain injuries.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And something you just said, and I'm curious your own experience with this, Kevin. You described preferring to be in a dark room, kind of thing. Well, one of the things that happens after head injuries, and maybe more so after repetitive head injuries, is light sensitivity of the eyes and the brain as a function of that. It's referred to as photophobia. So you're afraid of the light, but that technically you're not afraid. You just get symptoms because of the light. I don't. Did you have some of that? Because that's an important aspect of some of the post concussion kind of problems that can kind of come into bear for some people.
I would, if I had my druthers, that's the kind of mansion I would live in, a dark mansion. And I opened the door and there's the whales, I live it every day for the most of my life in the dark.
Yeah, and that's something to keep following up with a physician and things like that about, and maybe some forms of physical therapy can kind of help that in that. But it gets into some of the longer standing things. So having a single head injury is not a good thing. What I just described that happened to me, that's not a good thing. So sometimes I say, because I had the concussions, why I ended up as a psychiatrist and not as another type of doctor. So, but that's, I don't think people appreciate that. But anyway, so you do carry sequelae of these things, and one of them, there's several to kind of just talk about. One is what's called post-concussion syndrome that people will describe, and that's individuals who've had repeated head injuries, and so they can sometimes then have problems with more long-standing or chronic kind of headaches, some feeling the room spinning, kind of vertigo, dizziness, things like that, and even sometimes some weakness of some of their ability to do things, fine movements and other things like that. But also, some of them will report just difficulty concentrating and paying attention to things and trouble thinking about things. And by the way, some of this was documented in that New York City amateur soccer player study that I talked about.
Wow.
So those changes in the orbital frontal regions of the brain were associated with some problems with kind of memory formation and verbal memory and things like that, and verbal learning, and that, not grossly abnormal, but just different from the population of folks who were their age, controlled individuals that were their age and didn't play contact sport like soccer. So it's a real thing that some individuals, particularly with repetitive head injuries, repeated concussions and things like that, there are prices that are paid for that. Some of them not so bad. Some of them, though, symptomatic enough that people need continued follow-up with a primary care doc, sometimes with a neurologist, and sometimes with physical therapy folks who can kind of help them deal with some of the symptoms that they're having.
And there I thought I was just too poor to pay attention.
Yeah, that's right. That's Kevin. What's the adage? I was so poor I couldn't pay attention.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm 2 for 2 already, doctor. You have another couple?
Yeah. So other things that happen, and this gets into my specialty, is that sometimes acutely after a headache, after a concussion, right in the context of a concussion, some people can develop psychiatric symptoms like irritability, big problems sleeping, and problems with their mood in general, like low mood, anxiety, and things like that. And we're talking about people who don't have a past history of being depressed or anxious. If you do have a past history of psychiatric things, this can get worse in the post-concussion, the early post-concussion kind of period. And where psychiatrists get involved in this are individuals who may have had multiple head injuries, and now they're having more longer-standing problems with mood, anxiety, irritability can be a real problem. And these are folks who weren't necessarily irritable people earlier, but it's part of those more subtle kinds of injuries to the nervous system. And here's where psychiatry can end up playing a role in the care of individuals, is to try to help deal with that. Psychologists, I know you've had some sports psychologists on at times on the discussions around here. These are really important people who can help individuals deal with some of those kinds of symptoms, and even get those symptoms under control. Because one of the things that I would say about soccer players in general, particularly if you play for a number of years, is soccer players are pretty tough individuals. They're pretty resilient, and they're not ones to be complainers or other things like that, but yet sometimes they struggle with these kinds of symptoms. And making sure that a primary care doctor knows about it is really important, because the primary care doctor may be able to do some things on their own, but they're the conduit to being seen by neurology or by psychiatry or psychologists and things like that. And those are great resources for individuals who've been through repetitive, and we're talking now more repetitive concussions and repeated head injuries and things like that is the bigger problem. So that's a second one. And then for individuals who've had multiple concussions, often multiple concussions, but certainly multiple repeated head injuries of one form or another, there is a risk that we didn't really talk about 20, 30 years ago or more. And that is that some of those individuals can end up with what's called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. And I think many people have probably heard of that. And these are folks who, as they age, can develop symptoms of Alzheimer's type disease, where they have problems with memory, cognition, planning, and executive function, making decisions and things like that. That's kind of things that go along with Alzheimer's disease. Sometimes some individuals can develop problems with motor movements that also have cognitive problems associated with it, kind of what would be associated with Parkinson's disease. And there are some famous individuals, and more in football as I've said earlier, but also in boxing, who develop, kind of maybe post this chronic traumatic encephalopathy. I mean, one that comes to mind that I've never seen, but I understand the diagnosis was chronic traumatic encephalopathy, was Muhammad Ali. I mean, in his later life, he had significant problems with movement, kind of fitting into the Parkinson's kind of perspective, and that's likely related to the repeated head injuries that he had, even though he was one of the greatest boxers of all times. He boxed for a long time, and just like playing in other contact sports, you get hit enough times, you're going to pay a price for it. And so that's another one. And there, the care of those individuals with the chronic encephalopathy. Encephalopathy just means a brain disorder. Basically, that's a medical term for a brain disorder. A chronic traumatic, it means trauma was involved in it. Chronic means long-standing. Trauma means you got hit by something, you had some kind of head injury, and encephalopathy is just a pathological brain state. But it is now recognized as a risk factor for dementing illnesses like Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. So these are very real problems, and individuals need to continue care with primary care docs, who then and it may end up in the hands of neurologists specifically, and also psychiatrists, particularly for the mood and the other emotional kinds of problems, so to speak, that kind of occur in this. So those are three of the big things: the post-concussion syndrome that so many people have, the psychiatric so-called sequelae. Sequelae is just a medical term that means that comes after, basically. So you had head injuries. A sequelae is that for maybe a longer time, you have these kinds of symptoms, like psychiatric symptoms. And then the third one is the chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and what the outcome of chronic traumatic encephalopathy is. And there are management strategies to help all of this. That's an important aspect of what we're talking about today. And then if I would, the prevention of these things is absolutely critical. So the best way not to end up with these kind of late consequences of head injury is to prevent them. So a kid or a player who is dazed, has some head collision or whatever happens to him on the field, comes away and is dazed and not quite right, get them out of the game as fast as you can. Get them out of the game and do not put them back in. And I'm speaking specifically to the coaches, because sometimes these are the most important players on the field who've had this problem. If they have the dazed stuff, get them out of the game, because the risk is way high that they're going to re-injure that, and particularly in the short run and even in the longer run. So you got to get them out of the game. Sometimes they have to be seen by a physician and then gradually brought back to the game. Matter of fact, there's a study in, I'm sorry, but I figured this was more my talk, right, than question and answer. There's a study of Brazilian pro soccer players that I know of, and it was about kind of what happens to them kind of afterwards, and a chunk of them, a number of them have recurrences of head injuries. So something like 10% to 20% or so that have recurrent head injuries. And so on average, when they've had a head injury, it takes about 5, and these are pro players, mind you. So the game is to get them back on the field, and as well, the football players the same way. But many times, they aren't ready to go back on the field for at least almost a week after they've had a concussive kind of injury. And that's something to just keep in mind. Rushing kids and young players back after they've had a head injury is really not a smart strategy, in my opinion. And the coaches need to be really cognizant of that, even though that may cost you really good players at various times in the game. So that's one thing. Then sometimes after somebody's had a head injury or a repeated head injury, sometimes they're put in a spot where the recommendation from neurology or psychiatry or whoever is to wear a helmet for a period of time. And I've known some players who ended up wearing helmets at times during their soccer career. I mean, there was a great goalkeeper, Kevin, that I know you know of well, and that was Alan Mayer. back in the 1970s.
Yes.
Alan Mayer had significant. He was a great goalkeeper in my opinion, and he had repeated head injuries. So he played. By the time I really paid much attention to Alan, he was playing with a helmet on in the old North American Soccer League and the major indoor soccer and things like that. And if that can be allowed for some players, that's really important to preserve their brain as best as you possibly can. And then I'll make a final pitch and then turn it over to whatever you want to talk about. The other thing that helps dramatically for things not to get bad and chronic is to avoid as best you can alcohol and drugs. Those are not your friends if you've had a head injury. And so avoiding those, because they only compound the problem and they have their own problems. Not just the problems of addiction and other things like that, but problems with how the brain works. Matter of fact, one of the things my lab worked on, kind of how I got into all of this, is we got interested in why alcohol causes memory problems, because alcohol will cause something that looks like a concussion, frankly. So if you drink too much, there are a number of people who've had what's called a memory blackout from alcohol. Now, you've got to drink a fair amount to get there, but humans do that on a regular basis. And what happens in an alcohol blackout is that they're awake and seemingly alert, sometimes talk to you like, nothing's wrong, but they're not forming any new memories. So when they wake up the next day, they first of all don't remember where they were or who they talked to. Sometimes they don't even know where their car is or where they put their car keys, things like that. That's an alcohol-induced blackout. And when you add alcohol-induced memory impairment to traumatic encephalopathy, traumatic injuries like concussion, it's a bad mix for the brain, basically. And so that's my pitch: is man, if you've had those kind of head injuries, get off the stuff, man, because it's not doing you any good. So anyway, I'll stop. I hope that's helpful. I mean, as a way to think about the problem.
Normally I would applaud myself, but I'm 5 for 5. I'm going to have to call my doctor when I get out of here. Oh, my gosh. And Alan Meyer, he was Wales certified. We had a nice discussion about how all that came to be. And he had to have a special helmet to pass the rules test for the league and everything.
Absolutely, and they had to monitor kind of what he did with it.
Yeah.
Not to name names and things like that, but I know there was a time when he was playing in the North American Soccer League that a great player from St. Louis, Denny Vanager, had a head injury. He was great in the air.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, one of the best players I've known of any time to play in the air. He had a head injury when he was playing for the Stars, and he told me about them putting a helmet on him, and he said it may have been the best thing they ever did to me, because he says I really didn't have any fear after that, for the period of time that he wore the helmet and stuff like that. But it was it was important enough that he could get back on the field, but wearing a helmet was protective and protected his brain during that period, protected him from further head injury.
I don't know if you have seen, but there is a halo that rubberized that kids can wear. It's really padded and so forth. It's really kind of special. And there's states in the United States that say, hey, man, you got to wear them.
That's interesting. I haven't seen them on kids. The bit I'm around it with my grandkids at this point. So do all players wear it, or is it just someone who's had some problem?
No, they mandated everybody. If you want to play, you put the helmet on.
Yeah.
And the guy says, I'm not going to head the ball. I don't care. You got to wear the helmet, and they look nice. And they're practical.
I think that is a brilliant move. And as kids play with versions of helmets on them going forward, there may be a day when soccer is a helmeted sport. Some would rail at that and say that's never going to happen. But I think the problem of brain injury is high enough and scary enough in the long run that having soft helmets, having protective helmets of some sort, I think is mandatory. You look at the NFL now. Look at the space age helmets some of them are wearing these days, because the NFL and football has now recognized how much of a problem this really is, and thank God for that. But soccer's going to have to come to grips with all of this, I think, as well. So will other sports, like lacrosse. I think everybody wears helmets, but other kinds of games. One of the other sports that is in high school heavily associated with head injuries is basketball.
Wow.
You wouldn't necessarily think it, but I'm just looking. I've got some stuff written down here to try to help with this. Girls basketball is in the top 10 for head injuries, and it's not that they bang heads all the time, but they bang and then they get shearing on their neck, and that can cause concussive kinds of problems. So basketball may not be a helmeted sport at any point, but some of these other ones almost may well end up as helmeted sports at some point. That's some of the ones that we don't think of traditionally like that.
Yeah. And rightly so. I mean, my gosh, to be vain is not too bright.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd say is that, in kids and adolescents, they've got the youngest, most plastic, most learning machine kind of brain of any of us. It's the best our brains will ever be is at those ages, in my opinion. And so protecting them at that time is a good thing. A second good thing for kids and adolescents is that they recover from these things much better than adults. So someone who's 30 to 40 years old, or heaven forbid our age, a head injury is not a good thing for us. So our recovery is not particularly good from those things, and it's going to be more challenging. But the kids will recover pretty well. But if you can prevent them from getting injuries, man, you've done that kid, you've done society a great benefit with that.
Well said. And you can look at the whale that I pickled my brain because of, the head injury, that I took the alcohol thinking it's going to help me. It was just compounded interest, baby.
Yeah, absolutely. And truth and disclosure, the concussion I had was when we won a national championship. So after I was out of the ER with a couple of the other players, we were back with the team. I already can tell you, we had several beers that night at least. Winning a national championship, that was the first one I ever won. It was probably the biggest thing in my life at that point. And no doubt it was the biggest thing in my life.
Well, can you name names?
There was a bad strategy, and I'm positive the ER doc told us don't drink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As not to get anybody in trouble, but who were the other guys that got hurt from that fight?
I don't think any of them had head injuries, but somebody came up and kicked Denny Hannigan kind of viciously in the game, and he was out of the game.
Oh.
And then Bruce may have had some form of milder head injury. I don't remember exactly what Bruce's, because that was in the mix where I wasn't forming memories. But I know Bruce, Denny, and I all went to the emergency room.
Wow.
And I think Harry Keogh, not to belittle of the other players and stuff like that, Harry Keogh said something like, in retrospect, he says, there I am with three of the smartest players on my team, all with versions of head injuries or some other injuries that's going to send them to the emergency room and stuff. So it was a rough night.
Wow.
That one was.
Well, on behalf of Wales Certified, thank you, Dr. Chuck, for enlightening us to that history. I, for one, never, ever heard that story before.
Yeah, it's kind of buried in the annals of all of this. But like I said, there's a story about us beating UCLA that ended up in Sports Illustrated. Because that was the ninth of the SLU national championship. So they had a story in there around the themes of that game, and it was they had like 1, 2, 3 lines about the brawl that broke out in it, and the description of my injury was I got butted in the mouth by a Bruin player. Well, I didn't get butted in the mouth. I got butted in the temple. I got across field. Somebody took a run at me and just jacked me in the side of the head. Wow. That much I kind of, in retrospect, remembered kind of getting hit, and then that was it for me for a while, as I described.
Wow. And help me with the memory. Was that before or after the Billikens won the national championship with Denny Hannigan diving header at the...
Denny Hannigan's great goal, maybe the most famous picture in St. Louis soccer history.
Yeah.
Again, that's when, I did. The players giving crap about it to the president. That was in the 1970 national final against UCLA.
Yeah.
I think it was at the old Musial Field. It was in St. Louis, and Denny scored the goal to win that game 1-0 against UCLA.
Yes.
There's an interesting statement about the intertwinement of SLU with other teams. In 70 to 73, SLU beat UCLA in the national final 3 times, 70, 72, and then again in 73.
Wow.
Which is kind of an amazing story. Those were the 8th, 9th, and 10th national championships for SLU. But Denny and that gang of folks that I was lucky to be around, I didn't join them until I was a junior. They won 3 national championships, and then the 4th year they got beat in the national final by a Howard team.
Right.
And the Howard team was stripped of the national championship because of NCAA findings of ineligible players.
Right. Wow. Okay, Doctor. I mean, you're starting off the year right. Forget about the any snowstorm coming. We got some information and the wives and loved ones of all the players and the husbands will take care of each other, right?
Yeah, Kevin. And if this conversation today helps one kid, one individual with a soccer player or whatever kind of athlete, then I feel like we've done a great job, a great service. And I hope it helps a lot of people to just be cognizant and be aware. Don't be afraid. This is part of, you've got to play. If you're going to play the game, this is just part of the game, but it's how do you make it as safe as possible. That's the bottom line with it.
Man, I think you ended it just the right way. And wow. Well, Doctor, we're on to the next one, but you have done your duty here. Thank you so very much. And I'm kind of speechless. I'm going to, talk to my Irish doctor to say, hey, am I overzealous on this or?
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, you've made it to 68. I've got this thing. I'm 73. I'll turn 74 this year. So in our grade schools back in our era, I don't know if it was this way for you, but at the Catholic grade schools, if you got 70 on a test, you got a passing grade, right? So if you make it to, my new thing that I tell people is if I make it to 70, I get a passing grade on life. So man, you've only got 2 more years and you got the passing grade in your back pocket.
All right, baby. I'm ready.
You got a passing grade no matter what.
That's right. Yeah. So there you go, Dr. Chuck. Once again, we'll wrap it up unless you have something that you wanted to say to somebody. Take your time.
Hey, Kevin, I've had a chance to thank a whole bunch of folks. There's 2 things. One a very positive thing, and then I'll start with the somewhat negative one, and that is sadly the SLU soccer gang, particularly of my era, had a loss this week, and that is Tim Hoffman, a great player from CBC who played at SLU. Matter of fact, he started with SLU in 72 when I was a junior, when I started for SLU. Joe Clark was on with that freshman class. Tom Pellizzero was in that freshman class. He died this week, and that's a loss to the St. Louis soccer gang and for all of us who knew Tim and had the chance to play with him. So I just pay a tribute to Tim and everything that was so valuable about him as a person and a player. So that's one thing. And then, you've often asked me to thank people, and I've thanked a whole bunch of folks. I won't repeat that. But to start the new year, I hope people pay attention to your show and what you're trying to do with this. I think it's really fascinating. So I thank you for doing Whale Certified. So because I think it's a meaningful contribution to our St. Louis and broader soccer communities. So thanks, Kevin. That's what I would say.
Well, thank you, Dr. Chuck. You you're really something. So there I go, ladies and gentlemen. You too can be whale certified if you only try. Bye-bye, doctor.
Bye, Kevin. Take care. Have a great year.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
keep warm. Bye-bye.